Professors Kittay, Yarnall, Professor Thurman couldn't be here. Distinguished students, learned audience, greetings. Thank you for having me here. I have a concise but not so simple message for you today. You are a singularity, living in a simulation. If you forget everything else I say, remember and ponder that. The singularity isn't near, it's omnipresent. It always was, always will be. You're already in it, and indeed, thou art that. Tat tvam asi. This Sanskrit phrase, tat tvam asi, literally means thou art that. As in everything you see around you, and indeed everything that exists, the universe, the multiverse cosmos, and beyond that, its origin, the supreme mystery of consciousness, which we call God in English, is physically and spiritually you, and you are it. You are a part of it, and it is the rest of you. This Mahavakya, or great saying, or profound statement, comes from the Chandogya Upanishad, written in approximately 800 BC, and is one of the 4 Mahavakyas, which pronounce the universal identity which translators call the self. Strangely, this non-dual philosophical conclusion is the same as that arrived at by Parmenides, whose thesis was that no more than one thing exists. No more than one thing exists? Parmenides was a pre-Socratic, so think 450 BC. That one thing is you, is me, is everything. Things just seem to be different, but these differences are illusions. Viewed through a time-lapse camera, given enough time, decades, centuries, millennia, eons, kalpas, yugas, me, you, New York City, the United States of America, the planet Earth, the sun, are all but candles in a wind, movements in the cosmic dance, from which all of this emerged, and to which all of this returns. But I digress and must return to pleasantries. Thank you for inviting me here to Columbia to speak to your class this afternoon. What an honor to receive as a lifelong student of exactly this subject, which is the class title, Technology, Religion, and the Future. In just 20 minutes, I've been asked to impart to you the essence of my journey, both as an entrepreneur in the world and as a seeker of truth concerning the fundamental nature of being. For those of you I don't already know, I hope this is the beginning of a relationship. May the great conversation flourish between us. Life is long. A Columbia student who was in this class, Jonathan, reached out to me 8 years ago on Twitter, and we've been friends ever since and are still doing things together. For those of you I already know, may this advance our dialectic. Before I begin, I've been asked by Professor Kittay to introduce myself and my company. Like all of us, if we go far enough back, my family traces from immigrants on both sides. First generation on my mother's side, Kurdish and Persian, and on my father's side, Colombian and Anglo-Scotch Irish. I grew up in San Diego, California, which is an endless sea of suburban purgatory, before surviving freezing winters in upstate New York at Cornell University. After college, I moved to the dystopian promised land of San Francisco until it got too weird even for me, and I moved back to NYC where skyscrapers are still cool. Thanks to good teachers, I've studied classics across the liberal arts my whole life, Western classics until the age of 25, and actually prompted by the failure of my first company and an existential crisis, discovered Eastern and other world traditions. I've been an entrepreneur my whole career. My first company failed. My second company, Invisible, is in its 10th year. For the first 4 years, it seemed doomed to fail, but we kept going anyway. For the last 5.5 years, it's been a rocket ship and a roller coaster. Investors had never seen a services to software business model, technology platform, and overall corporate strategy. They had never seen such a thing succeed. So we raised only $7 million, got to profitability, used debt to buy back half of our investors, so that 65% of the company is still owned by the team to this day. Because of that motivation and alignment of incentives, we've achieved amazing results for shareholders, including scaling profitably to $134 million of revenue last year. Once we achieved a $25 million revenue run rate, I brought in a CEO from Bridgewater, the hedge fund, who helped us scale to our current size. And last week, we announced a new CEO from McKinsey, the head of McKinsey's AI unit, Quantum Black Labs, who we're confident can scale us to $1 billion+ in annual revenues. JP Morgan is leading our pre-IPO raise, and we plan to go public as early as the second half of next year. Heady stuff. The name of the company, Invisible Technologies, is an homage to Plato's cave and theory of the forms, the Heart Sutra's interplay of form and formlessness, and 2 Arthur C. Clarke maxims. Technology is at its best when it becomes invisible. And any sufficiently advanced technology becomes indistinguishable from magic. What does Invisible do? We do AI training for big tech companies like OpenAI, Google, xAI, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, Meta. So when you ask it a question about Chinese astrology and it's getting it wrong, it's because we haven't trained it how to do that yet. And we help Fortune 500 companies and governments build AI capabilities and increase efficiency. We've also started an incubator named Infinity to start 8 more AI software services companies like Invisible. And our fund, Visionary Ventures, has invested in 30 companies with similar business models, tech platforms, and corporate strategies. Our company culture and corporate strategy is an alternative to the venture game and wokeness, which we call the sovereignty game. You can read more about that philosophy at www.sovereignty.game. A midlife crisis a day keeps the doctor away. Recently, I realized that thanks to Lady Fortune and our amazing allies, if our good luck continues, inshallah, I could retire in a few years if I wanted to. But after deeply considering it and rereading the Bhagavad Gita, I felt a clear knowing within that resignation would be selfish. I feel a calling to serve, to teach, and to give everything away, because the tax rate on death is 100%. This most recent realization, as the Taittiriya Upanishad puts it, joy is divine, service is divine, thus service is joyful, has brought me to great peace and contentment, even in the midst of an insanely busy schedule and high-pressure operating environment. While we're always striving to maximize long-term shareholder value, Professor Thurman wanted me to tell you that I am content. Contentment is very important in life. And if you don't achieve it, have you achieved anything? This business of samsara is just a game, and we're playing for impact. Not just material impact, creating jobs, generating wealth, but spiritual impact, empowering, enlightening, manifesting. True wealth is what can't be taken from you. I greatly admire the tradition of American entrepreneurs who have given it all away. Mellon, Carnegie, Buffett, Gates, Feeney, and more. Karma is the cryptographically secure currency of the simulation. Now back to technology, religion, and the future, the good stuff, now that I've introduced myself. Yeah, it was a chef's kiss. I wanted to Karma is the cryptographically secure currency of the simulation. I have your approval, Professor? All right, now back to the good stuff. Enough about me. In Sam Altman's recent blog post, Intelligence Age, he summarizes all of human history in 3 words: deep, learning, worked. This is like Genghis Khan summarizing all of history in 2 words: stirrups worked. From this point of view in the hockey stick graph, it really does look like everything led up to this moment. But then you run into what economists call constraints. You hit an S-curve, and then you plateau, and then suddenly it's not about the stirrups, and it's not about deep learning. It's about something else. We hit some limits. How do we solve these limits? And then you have a new invention, and then you go through another hockey stick, and then it seems like all of history led up to that. And you might think of, if the crucifix was the sign of the Christian medieval era, the hockey stick is sort of the sign of our era. And it is effectively a form of blindness. It's a blind spot. So it is not my view that AI is going to result in mass unemployment, eliminate the need for most companies to exist, replace the price and market system, or put an end to death itself. I'll give you just one example of those because you can go into all of them. But imagine you say, okay, we tried communism in the USSR. It didn't work, but it was because we tried to do it in the Politburo and get all the smart people in a room. If we just had AI, we could try it again, and the Politburo could tell where the Amazon packages should go. So let's give it another shot. And the price system, you can think of it as a kind of proto-AI. How does Amazon know where to send the packages? Because you click and you say, I want it. And if AI was truly infinite, well, maybe you wouldn't even need companies. You could just automate everything. You wouldn't need companies, you wouldn't need prices, you wouldn't need markets, you wouldn't need human labor, you wouldn't need any of it. And you definitely wouldn't need to die because you just solved that. So I view the three curses of the book of Genesis. You shall surely die. You will live by the sweat of your brow, and let us confuse their languages. Death, labor, and coordination, as still binding to this day. They are not only the foundation of economics, but the constraints of the simulation itself, like game rules. Advancements in longevity do not remove the threat and eventual inevitability of death. Time-saving machines do not remove the utility, necessity, or limitless potential of human labor. Employment is at an all-time high in this country. If AI is so great, why are wages going up and employment going at an all-time high? Communication and coordination technologies do not resolve the need for individuals to negotiate. There's still so much negotiation happening all the time everywhere, especially in every household. 100 years ago, Ronald Coase at the University of Chicago was asking sci-fi questions like, why doesn't one company do everything? He should be considered the prophet of 21st century microeconomics. Inefficiency is endless. Thus, efficiency will always be in demand. Frictions between supply and demand will always exist. Thus, goods and services that reduce the friction will always be in demand. I'm bullish on invisible because I know that the three things which would break our business model won't happen. The trend towards increasing specialization of labor will not end. The trend towards increasing number of AI automation and software solutions will not end. And three, customer preference to deal with the complexity created by more and more technologies and more specializations by creating integrated end-to-end solutions with outcomes-aligned pricing will not end. Customers will want end-to-end solutions and alignment. The two biggest memes in the media today are essentially Luciferian. Longevity promises you can live forever, and AI promises you can be God, or a God, or at least have an omniscient, omnipotent genie in a bottle fulfilling all of your wishes. You can live forever, and you can be God. You can live forever, and you can be God. That's a marketer's dream. It's the perfect lie. This is what I call the false 21st century neo-religion of AI, which is less violent than the false 20th century neo-religions of fascism and communism, which resulted in the death of 150 million people, but nonetheless, still a dangerous attempt to fill the void created by the death of God. Neo-religious movements like this were prophesied by Nietzsche, who already in the late 19th century realized that the secularization of the Western academy and society would lead to the existential destabilization of our civilization, resulting in constant crisis until that void is filled. Although the false 21st century neo-religion of AI is nonviolent so far and hasn't turned into actual formal religious or political movements, it is still dangerous because it leads to unrealistic utopian expectations, entitled politics, and outrageous manic risk-taking. Far be it from me to promulgate a true neo-religion of AI, but if there were such a thing, it would return us to ancient wisdom and to empower us and enlighten us, and then challenge us to lead heroic lives without attachment to the outcome. Progress, if there has ever been such a thing since the Epic of Gilgamesh of ancient Sumeria, although plumbing and dentistry are nice, begins with embracing our individual sovereignty, awakening our intuitive wisdom and creative imagination, then dedicating ourselves to the noble purposes which arise from such awareness. We are the wizards, technology is the wand. What are we going to do with it? As Heidegger realized in his breakthrough essay, The Question Concerning Technology, this is in the 1950s, human and technological nature liberate each other. They are symbiotic. As technology gets more powerful, we have fewer and fewer excuses for not realizing our full potential, for not becoming Buddhas. The Professor Yarnall in his class earlier was talking about how one of the meanings of Buddha is not just awakening, but flourishing, realizing your potential. Thus, we should measure ourselves against Leonardo da Vinci and the greatest individuals who've ever lived who did not have iPads and Starlink minis and yet fulfilled their extraordinary destiny nonetheless. In 2025, our default assumption is that our civilization, our moment in history, our society is the most powerful, advanced, and enlightened to have ever graced this planet Earth. Our chronological snobbery knows no bounds. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if we, with all our amassed wealth and power, all of our 21st century science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, finally reach the summit of the mountain of progress, only to find a bunch of medieval and ancient sages, musicians, poets, artists, and philosophers sitting there waiting for us, wondering what took you guys so long? We left so many clues, centuries and centuries, 5 millennia of clues. And you're only just now starting to ask about the singularity? Meditate. Your professors share this view with me. That which is ancient is most futuristic. That is why I am here today. I am pleased to announce that we, and also Professor Thurman, who's not with us today, are co-founding, and Professor Kittay's son, Bear, who's been a friend of mine for over a decade now. We are co-founding the Eternity Foundation together, and we invite you to join us. To restore the wisdom, knowledge, and glorious achievements of all past human civilizations, to bring them back to life in the age of AI, and to share them for the benefit of all sentient beings as our shared inheritance. Our source code, the most important technology to preserve and guide us on our journey to the stars. The irrecoverable loss of the Great Library of Alexandria, which burned down about 2,000 years ago, is widely known, but not felt acutely enough. Lightning, one of the companies in our incubator, is building a new Great Library of Alexandria, which you can explore in beta at alexandria.wiki. Our vision is to bring history to life, to build the best classics experience in the world. Imagine learning corporate strategy by time traveling with Sun Tzu or Napoleon. Imagine learning yoga in virtual reality in Mysore Palace of the early 17th century from ancient Indian Brahmins. But most people have not heard about the Great Library of Nalanda, which is our next project, teaming up with your professors. Nalanda is the Great Library of Alexandria of the East, producing 17 preeminent sages like Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Vasubandhu, Dharmakirti, and Zhuangzhang, who studied both the outer sciences, what we call STEM today, and the inner sciences like philosophy. It flourished in the 7th and 8th century Renaissance of northern India, attracting scholars from China and other faraway lands, but it was burned down in a 12th century invasion. But thankfully, there was a backup drive. King Trisong Dortsen of Tibet underwent a religious conversion from Bon shamanism to Buddhism and invited a wizard named Padmasambhava to help him convert his court and country. They built temples and libraries and sent wave after wave of translators to Nalanda, paying for their IP in gold. When the last translator, Vairochana, had almost run out of gold and had mastered the teachings, he copied the last manuscripts with invisible ink and used what little gold he had left to bribe the captain of the guards, so that when he was interviewed at the gate, the unsuspecting guard, seeing blank scrolls, let him leave the citadel with the sacred teachings. Now, for the first time, these teachings are available to digitize and translate. A project that might cost up to $100 million with traditional translation techniques, with our AI training techniques and digital operations expertise, we believe may cost as little as $20 million. This is the Eternity Foundation's first major undertaking. And if we succeed, hopefully there will be many more. The end. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So at Columbia, we had only a 20-minute slot, and I wanted to finish the recording so that we have it for the record. So I'm going to pick up where I left off in class. we are looking for the 21st century Nag Hammadi. Nag Hammadi, for those of you who don't know, is the real-life Indiana Jones story in which a crypt was discovered in 1945, which contained Platonic, Hermetic, Gnostic, and Christian texts, including texts that had never before been known, like the Gospel of Thomas. Ancient Eastern teachings only began to come into the Western consciousness in the 19th century with the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, the Upanishads, and the Tao Te Ching. The I Ching was only first translated into English and German in the 1950s. We have only begun to understand the ancients. In 2003, the technology industry was stunned by a philosophy paper written by Nick Bostrom of Oxford entitled, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" Bostrom reasoned from the following syllogism. 1. Is it possible to build a simulator that is as high resolution as the world we live in? If yes, then 2. Is it desirable to build simulations? If yes, then the conclusion is 3. Then there is a 99.99% chance you are already living in a computer simulation. This is not a new idea. The 3rd century Mahayana Buddhist text, the Lankavatara Sutra, states, "All things have the nature of illusion and are like a dream. Understand the fundamental fact that the external world is nothing but a manifestation of universal mind." This is not an incidental statement, but one of the central theses of all 3 schools of Buddhism and of the various schools of Hinduism, which refer to the illusory nature of the world as Maya and to the cyclic nature of existence as samsara. The oldest book of the most ancient Taoist tradition of ancient China, the I Ching, or Book of Changes, recognizes as its premise that everything in the material world is subject to change, and then proceeds to map the patterns of change, building an oracle algorithm capable of simulating 10 to the 112th power possible simulations, much more than the estimated number of atoms in the universe, 10 to the 82nd. The Shiva Sutras from Kashmir begin with the mantra Caitanya Matma, which one Swami translated into English as "the independent state of supreme consciousness is the reality of everything." In other words, you are living in the mind of God. Everything is made of consciousness. 500 years before St. John merged Greco-Roman pagan and Judeo-Christian civilizations with the unforgettable mantra, "In the beginning was the Logos." Heraclitus, writing in the same city, Ephesus, wrote, "Yet all things follow from the Logos." The Greek word logos has been translated as the word, but it can also be translated as magical music, a powerful command, mantra, or spell, or even source code. What came before the Big Bang that kicked off the simulation we're living in? Why, the source code, of course. The ancient Hindus were not the only ones to see, as William Blake put it, the universe in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. You too can hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour if you look again. The next time you're alone at home, undistracted, pause, close your eyes, and look again within you. Meditating, we discover that our mind has the quality of space. As Napoleon put it, imagination rules the world. With our eyes closed, we are capable of conjuring anything. Then open your eyes again, and the next time you're in a garden or in the city, look again around you. Look again at anything or anyone. The more closely, the more carefully you look, the more you will see. Whether by science or by philosophy, as you study the world again and again and peel back its layers, attempting to unveil the mystery, you will discover, as Lao Tzu, the Taoist sage, discovered, mysteries within mystery, the gateway to all understanding. Or, as the pre Socratic Greek philosopher Anaximander put it, infinity in every direction. For a scientifically skeptical and rigorous contemporary book on the nature of mind and the fundamental nature of being, I recommend David Bentley Hart's All Things Are Full of Gods, The Mysteries of Mind and Life, published recently in August of last year. One of Hart's central observations is that every subject grounds out in infinite complexity. Kant had a similar observation about the noumenal versus the phenomenal. The phenomenal is infinite, multi layered, and endlessly complex. The noumenal will never describe it. Another one of Hart's central observations is most beautifully summarized by Hazrat Inayat Khan, an Indian Sufi and musicologist who came to New York City a century ago. In a compilation of his writings entitled The Mysticism of Sound and Music, I read this perfect summation of Hart's point. The difference between the material and the spiritual point of view is that the material point of view sees matter as the first thing, from which intelligence, beauty, and all else evolved afterwards. From the spiritual point of view, we see the intelligence and beauty first, and from them comes all that exists. In other words, either matter and energy comes first, and consciousness somehow emerges, or consciousness came first, before the Big Bang, and matter and energy proceeded from it. It is of supreme interest that the subjects of computer science, mathematics, cryptography, physics, comparative religion, mythological literature, mystical poetry, and philosophy all converge, as it were, at this intersection. The question of singularity. Is there such a thing as progress? And if so, is it accelerating in our lifetime? Are we already living in a simulation? If so, how can we either escape or change it? If not, is it possible and desirable to build one as high resolution as our current experience of the world? These aren't just academic questions, and they aren't new. They are simultaneously ancient and futuristic, and much of the drama of both world history and current events, as I understand them, is tied up in them. As a child, I was enamored of Arthurian legend. If you haven't delved into this mythology yet, I recommend starting with The Once and Future King by T.H. White, then proceeding to Idylls of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson, Le Morte d'Arthur by Malory, and then even farther back to Historia Regnum Britanniae, the Mabinogion, the French romances, and the German quest of Parzival. But the TLDR is the knight who defeats the dragon, rescues the princess, saves the realm, becomes king, restores justice, peace, and prosperity, and lives happily ever after, passing on the reign to his eldest son as a noble heir and worthy successor. Or tragically dies trying, in the case of Arthur himself, who is betrayed by his best friend, his own queen, and his firstborn son. Analyzed archetypally in the fashion of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, what is the meaning of this strange dream? The noble philosopher, warrior, poet, king is the exact midpoint between the archetypes of the nonviolent and compassionate saintly martyr in the lineage of Christ and Buddha, and the archetype of the barbarian warlord, like the Gothic and Viking berserkers who invade to rape and pillage, taking all that they desire by force. After the Roman Emperor Constantine converted from Greco Roman paganism to Christianity and made it the state religion of the empire with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, Christianity could no longer be a religion for martyrs alone. They realized then that heroes are necessary. Heroes are still necessary in the world. The role of a hero, of a knight, of a philosopher king is to use might in service of right instead of the alternatives of right without might or might makes right. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna that it is better to do your dharma halfway well than to do somebody else's dharma perfectly well. And then he says, your dharma is to fight. But unlike Arjuna, in the 21st century, as St. Paul prophesied, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against inefficiency, lack of imagination, and ignorance. Krishna goes on to tell Arjuna that it is not enough to be a sage, to pursue a life of meditation and contemplation, because his calling is to be a knight. He must act. But the era of knights is over, is it not? The lineage of Plato's philosopher kings, queens and wizards, like Marcus Aurelius, like Arthur and Merlin, like Trisong Detson and Padmasambhava, like Socrates and Pericles, like David and Samuel, like Zarathustra and Vishtaspa. This line has been broken. Has it not? I assume you are all cynical and skeptical New Yorkers like me. Magical realism ended with our childhood realization that Santa Claus isn't real, the Force isn't real, and there are no Jedis who aren't LARPing. Cervantes' Don Quixote is the delusional fool who imagines himself to be a hero. We don't want to be the next Don Quixote. And yet neither did Abraham or Indiana Jones, but they took the leap of faith. Every entrepreneur learns how to walk on water. The once and future renaissance begins when we wake up from the simulation, realize that we are the singularity, avatars here to manifest the most desirable possible future. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Nirvana is hidden here in samsara. Thus come and gone, mysteriously yours, Francis, your digital twin.